The rooster's crow released its son into the middle of the room. The sudden blaze blew the curtain half open.
In today's time-obsessed world, it might be hard to imagine one in which the day's toil began with the faint sound of a rooster's crow. But that's how it was only a few centuries ago in rural America, where time wasn't dictated by a clock or calendar, but by the natural rhythms of the days and seasons. Our rural ancestors set their own schedules in accordance with the sun. Their day of work and household chores was not from 9 to 5, but from sunrise to sundown. Dinner was typically midday, as they were ready by then for a substantial meal, and the natural light let them cook without candles or kerosene lamps. And nightfall, whenever that came, meant bedtime. Even for townspeople, time was loosely structured compared to our own today. Many more urbanites had clocks or watches, but it was still mostly the wealthy who owned them. Most Americans, rural or urban, set their own schedules and worked at their own pace. Their days were measured not by a timepiece, but by their daily tasks. But that all changed with the Industrial Revolution, which began in Great Britain in the middle of the 18th century and spread to the rest of the world, including the United States, by the 1830s and 40s. During this period of innovation and invention in America, people in rural communities struggled to make ends meet, and as the need for farm workers declined, many left their homes for flourishing towns and cities to work in factories, mills, and mines. For many, it was the first time they had ventured this far from their small villages, and for the first time, a large number of women began working outside the home, mostly in textile mills. Child labor was also common in the mills during the 19th century. Children were seen as valuable workers because of their small hands, perfect for tasks like weaving thin threads into the spinning mule. Men, women, and children worked as many as 16-hour days, and were typically paid very little for this arduous work that exposed them to both respiratory illnesses and serious machine injuries. The migration from rural to urban settings quickly led to overcrowded cities and conditions ripe for disease, crime, poverty, and pollution. And as labor became more plentiful, factory owners often paid their workers less and paid less attention to their health and safety. Along with completely transforming an economy that had been based on agriculture, industrialization also had major effects on people's general well-being. Factory jobs were oftentimes so difficult and draining that workers had little opportunity for recreation and spending time with their families. Industrialization would forever transform their notion of time, which was no longer communicated by the rising and setting of the sun, but by the driving pace of machinery. In a large, poorly lit room, women stand in rows at long work tables, spinning cotton into yarn. Lint and fabric dust hang heavy in the air. The heat and humidity are overwhelming. And then there's the noise. Wheels whirring, metal parts clattering. The incessant noise, the continual buzzing and humming of machinery is deafening. Then, a bell rings. The machines stop, and the room becomes quiet. Without leaving their positions, the workers pull out tin pails from beneath the tables. They eat quickly. In a few minutes, the bells ring again, and they get back to their machines. This was a familiar scene across the US as factories began sprouting up around the turn of the 19th century. And as factories exploded, so did the need for time management, and an already thriving bell manufacturing industry was about to become even bigger. By the mid-19th century, bells had already become an important means of communication. They called parishioners to worship and to mourn. They warned sailors of fog and other navigational hazards. They also marked celebrations and milestones, and made magnificent music. Both bell manufacturing and bell hanging were growing businesses, many of them in New England. Before he became better known for his midnight ride through Boston, revolutionary Paul Revere ran his own foundry in the city's north end, casting bells for churches, ships, and factories. These iron giants weighed anywhere from 500 to 2,500 pounds. For those who eventually abandoned their farms for jobs in the city, bell ringing would soon take on new meaning, no longer summoning them to prayer, but to work instead. The sound would no longer signal the start of Mass, but instead the beginning of a long, tedious shift. For many young women who had left their homes in the country and moved into boarding houses near textile mills, the first bell of the day might have been as early as 4:30 a.m., telling them that it was time to wake up for work. There were also bells to signal the beginning of meals and the end. The last bell of the day, maybe 10 at night, would tell the workers that it's time to go to bed. For the first time, our rural ancestors worked by the clock, and for the first time, their days were divided into periods, and their lives strictly regulated, all by the ringing of bells. Some of these newly built industrial towns seem to offer better opportunities than others. Many of the young working women stayed in company-owned boarding houses where they were served healthy meals and where the social interaction provided much-needed balance to the demands of factory life. In Lowell, Massachusetts, one of the largest textile factory cities in the country, mill workers were paid enough to be able to go shopping and attend night school. They even produced their own literary magazine. And in an effort to appear more wholesome to young prospective women workers from the countryside, mills were designed with bell towers to make them look more like churches and cathedrals. Unfortunately, the long, exhausting workday left little time and energy for activities outside the factory. By the mid-19th century, factory workers in Lowell and other towns were clocking an average of 12.5 hours per day, 6 days a week, even more when you include the time some of them spent traveling from the mills. The system of long hours was embodied in the factory bells that controlled their days and structured their lives. Waking them up, calling them into the mills, ringing them for breakfast, again for lunch, closing time, and finally, curfew. Repeated tardiness by workers was seen as serious misconduct and cause for termination, so the bells' mere existence became a constant threat to their livelihood and peace of mind. The mental toll that these bells had on the Lowell Mill women is evident from the poems and stories they published in their literary journal, The Lowell Offering. In one story, a character bemoans the relentless ringing of the bells and suggests they have mechanized or dehumanized their lives. "I am going home," she writes, "where I shall not be obliged to rise so early in the morning, nor be dragged out by the ringing of the bell. I object to the constant hurrying of everything. We cannot have time to eat, drink, or sleep. Up before day at the clang of the bell, and out of the mill by the clang of the bell, into the mill and at work, in obedience to that ding-dong of a bell, just as though we were so many living machines." The increasing impact of the factory bell on the lives of working men, women, and children in the industrial age is also reflected in the bell tower itself. By the end of the 19th century, the factory bell tower had evolved from a simple wood-frame cupola to an elaborate Victorian structure like those that top the mill towers in the textile town of Manchester, New Hampshire. Factory bells like these not only imposed a new time discipline for workers, but they quite literally loomed over their daily lives and occupied a permanent place in their consciousness. The factory bells of the Industrial Revolution helped change our perception of time and our obedience to it. Centuries later, the bells are still ringing, summoning us, dictating the day's events, and telling us where to be. The arsenal now includes buzzers and horns and chimes, but they all still carry the same message and continue to keep us in check.
Hi, John Chomko here. Wanted to spend a minute with you just to show you how our buzzer or horn and tone generator system works. Very simple system, but very appropriate for many different markets: warehousing, manufacturing, and schools. Any place where you need a sound or an event to happen at a scheduled time.